wind curled tighter around the cottage, dragging its icy fingers through every crack in the wall like it was searching for a soul to claim. The moon hung behind a curtain of mist, pale and indifferent, casting no light through the slits in the timber. The world outside was a cold mouth, and this house, this frail shell of lath and mud, was all that stood between breath and stillness. Inside, the air thickened with breath and sleep. Each exhale from the sleepers steamed faintly in the dark, then vanished like forgotten names. The child did not wake. Her tiny ribs rose with effort. Her dreams were not dreams, but echoes of the pig's heart thudding beneath her, of the bell, of a scream once heard in the woods and never spoken of again. She stirred only when the grandmother shifted, whispering broken Latin, sanctified by repetition, worn smooth like the wooden cross tucked beneath her pillow. A prayer more for memory than salvation. The strangers, the journeyman, breathed in. Tandem, one had a crooked toe from frostbite. The other bore lice in his beard that glinted faintly in the dim candle stub. They had come from different villages, but shared the same silence. They had no right to ask whose house this was. In this land, warmth outranked honor. The pig grunted and rolled, pressing against the child's calf. Its body was hot, its skin slick where the lice couldn't find purchase. It had no name, no tether, but it was more guardian than beast. Its presence meant life, and it was too precious to be slaughtered, too filthy to be kissed. A soft clatter came from the roof snow, slipping from thatch, or perhaps a squirrel dying in the cold. No one moved. The woman beneath the smock kept whispering, not loudly, just enough for her tongue to remember the shape of loss. Her fingers worked the rosary without looking. Muscle memory from a time when faith was less desperate and death less familiar. There was once a man in that room. Her husband, his boots, still sat by the hearth, cracked at the heel, the leather greased for resurrection. She refused to move them, in case he returned, in case death forgot. But he'd been gone 3 winters now, dragged into the marsh to cut reeds, and never came back. His name was still known to her mouth, but not to the wind. Her son, the one who died in autumn, still had his cot by the door. She hadn't the heart to burn it. Sometimes a toddler, the one still breathing, would crawl into it and call it his own. Not out of remembrance, but because it smelled different, slightly sweeter, slightly gone. The air inside the house did not move. It swelled with shared fever and fermented vegetables, with cabbage stew that had boiled all day on a flame that died too soon. There were no windows, only slits of hope covered by cloth dipped in wax to keep the wind from screaming too loud. It never worked, and still they slept, or something near sleep, a drifting in and out, a waiting. Sleep in such rooms was not gentle. It was negotiated, with bones pressing into strangers, with breath caught in the throat, with thighs aching from too much stillness. The girl shifted again and touched her foot to the spoon at the threshold. Cold, hard, a relic of her mother's mother. Placed there the night the midwife said the devil had followed a stillborn in. The candle flickered once. Then again, the wick hissing like it remembered the fire it had come from. Then nothing. Just the glow of dying embers in the hearthmore. Shadow than heat now. The journeyman with the crooked toe coughed in his sleep and rolled toward the girl. She did not wake, but her small hand clenched into a fist in another room, in another world that would have mattered. But here it was. The natural rhythm of the night. People pressed close, not out of love, but ritual. The ritual of enduring. No one spoke of tenderness, only warmth. A night like this could stretch, could loop, could feel like a lifetime. Many would die on nights like this, not from murder nor plague, nor wrath, but from forgetting to breathe, from the cold seeping in too far, too deep, from a spirit not held down by another's weight. And yet, as the dark deepened, something like harmony settled, a stillness not of peace, but of permission, the permission to rest, even if only for hours, even if only until the frost claimed the roof beams or the pig coughed blood in its sleep. Outside, the bell no longer rang. The monks had gone to bed, or to God, it didn't matter. The woman whispered one final name, not aloud, but into the palm of her hand, folding it closed like a secret, and tucked it beneath her breast as she lay flat. Her eyes closed, but the corners of her lips quivered, just once, as if in apology. The girl's cheek pressed harder into the thistle straw, feeling the dampness rise from it like breath. She dreamed of bread, not the kind they had dent, black and bitter, but white bread. Angel bread, bread she'd seen once, carried by a knight's wife during Easter. He had beaten a beggar for reaching toward it. The girl did not know what it tasted like, but it lived in her bones, like a hunger too holy to name. And in the last hour before morning, when the sky turns not light but less black, something shifted. A mouse scurried across the floor, chased by nothing. The journeyman murmured in tandem, something forgotten and fearful. The pig exhaled a grunt, then fell back asleep. The grandmother smiled just briefly, died. Her body did not twitch. It did not stiffen. She simply stopped breathing in rhythm with the others, her hand still on the rosary, her final word lost in its turning. The girl beside her stirred, only slightly, curling tighter toward the pig. No one would know until dawn. No one would cry until chores were done. And even then, grief would be brief. She had lived long enough, longer than most. She had seen 3 winters take 3 husbands, 4 children, and a harvest. She had prayed more than any bishop. Her death was not a tragedy. It was just the night, doing what it does. Soon, morning would scrape its grey knuckles against the eastern sky. The crows would land on the roof, pecking at the ice. The fire would be relit, and someone would boil the cabbage again. Someone would fetch water from the stream, frozen at the edges. Someone would wipe the dead woman's face and close her eyes with 2 coins they didn't have. But for now, in the hush that came just before dawn, they slept, limbs tangled, breaths shared, hearts quiet. The wind did not stop. The dark did not lift. But in the center of that ancient silence, life thin, ragged, stubborn still, clung to the warmth of the pig, and the girl, still dreaming of angel bread, did not wake. A crow cawed once, then again its voice swallowed by the thick, wet fog that rolled like breath across the moorland. Overhead, the sky sagged with cloud, bruised purple and iron grey. No stars dared pierce it. The wind slithered along the thatch of the roof, dragging sleet and ash behind it. The house shivered. Not just the walls or the timbers, but the house itself, as if it too were trying to survive the night. Inside, bodies lay strewn like fallen timber after a storm. The bed, if one could call it, that was merely a frame of warped oak and rope webbing. On top, straw, old sacks, a shredded tunic once worn to mass, and a single sheepskin that had not been cleaned since the Away gave birth in spring. It reeked of lanolin and old blood, but it was softer than stone, and that was enough. The young girl lay closest to the pig. Its warmth was thick and steady, its scent sharp as sour milk. She'd long since stopped minding the bristle of its flank against her cheek. It beat back the cold better than her mother ever could. The animal grunted once in its sleep, then fell still again, its snout steaming slightly in the bitter air. Her brother coughed shallow and wet, the kind of cough that did not heal. It rattled like a broken bell. The sound passed through the others, but did not wake them. He was not the first child to sound that way. He would not be the last. A mother, stirred only slightly at the sound, eyes closed, mind hovering just above sleep. Her skin was pale in the candlelight, lips cracked from salt. Her hands were bandaged with cloth ripped from her husband's old shirt, long since too thin to wear. She didn't cry when he died, not when they lowered his body into a grave without stone or blessing. But her eyes had not stopped looking for him in the doorway each dusk. The ploughman lay beside her, dagger clutched to his chest beneath a ragged cloak. His hair was soaked from travel, and he smelled of old rain and dried dung. They hadn't asked his name. He hadn't offered it. He paid for a place by the fire with silence, and that was a currency she trusted more than words. The candle burned low, its wax dribbling in slow arcs down the sides of a clay saucer. A single strand of smoke rose from it and curled toward the rafters like a question unanswered. Above, beams creaked. The roof leaked in 2 places. Water tapped into an iron bowl someone had placed below, sounding like footsteps from another world. The mother's breath caught in her throat, not from fear, but from the weight of remembering. Just beyond the edge of the bed, by the door wrapped in sheepskin and sorrow, sat a worn wooden cradle, empty. She hadn't the courage to give it away. Some nights her daughter climbed into it, chasing a scent long gone. Other nights, the cradle remained untouched, its stillness more haunting than sound. The girl shifted again, closer to the pig, whose heat grounded her dreams. She did not know the world outside, only fields she couldn't name, hunger that arrived like the moon, and stories whispered by the fire of saints who bled for love, of devils who lived in wells, of queens who wept for peasants in secret. She believed none of it, but carried the images in her sleep like stones in a pocket. Beside her, the stranger breathed through his mouth, chest rising like a slow tide. His feet were still wrapped in boots, laced tightly to keep the rats from chewing his toes. He was not safe. But then again, no one here was. Trust was not a gift, was a risk. And the mother had run out of things to risk. So she had let him in, with a gesture, with space. The fire had died down to embers. The room smelled of boiled cabbage and sweat-soaked linen. Fleas shifted from one body to the next, tiny priests conducting their cruel ministry across skin and scar alike. The girl scratched in her sleep and whispered something. A name, maybe, or a prayer. Outside, the wind caught the corner of the roof again and tore a thatch loose. The mother heard it, but did not rise. She'd already stuffed one hole with rags from a wedding dress. The dress had belonged to her sister or her aunt. She couldn't remember now. It didn't matter. It was white once. It wasn't anymore. The ploughman twitched in his sleep and muttered in some tongue that did not belong to this village. The girl's brother reached for him in a fever dream, but stopped just short of touch, his hand hovering mid-air like a dying star. The pig shifted. The bed creaked. The mother opened her eyes and looked at nothing. She was awake now, and in that hollow space between midnight and morning, she thought of the Virgin, the painted one in the chapel, with cheeks like apples and a robe of blue. But the other one, the one no one spoke of, the one who bled, the one who didn't glow, the one who slept on dirt beside carpenters, thieves, and animals. The mother imagined her here, in this room, curled beside her, cradling a dead child and a live pig, whispering the names of saints with cracked lips. The girl stirred again. This time, her small hand reached out and found the pig's belly. It was still warm, still breathing, still alive, and for a moment, brief and unspeakable, the mother felt something unfamiliar. Not peace, not joy, but proximity. To something holy, to something forgotten. She closed her eyes again and let the darkness wash over her, not like water, but like cloth, soft, heavy, worn with time. The lullaby she once sang to her first child came unbidden to her lips. She didn't sing it aloud. She mouthed it like a secret, like a spell no one else moved, no one else heard. But in that moment, the house did not feel cursed. It felt cloaked. The candle hissed one final time and went out. The stranger did not wake. The children did not cry. The pig snorted and settled, deeper into the straw, and above them, beyond the rafters, beyond the black sky, beyond the reach of frost and prayer, a hawk circled. It would not be seen by them, but it would see them, and in its cry, when it finally broke the sky at dawn, there would be something like warning, something like mourning, something like the sound of the next chapter. A flake of ash drifted silently from the chimney's lip, gliding down through a shaft of chill air and landing on the brow of a sleeping child. He did not wake. His face twitched only slightly, lost in some dream that had no color, no language, only the ache of hunger. His lips moved around an imagined crust of bread, dry and invisible, swallowed long ago in thought. Beside him, an old man wheezed. His chest rose with difficulty, like bellows clogged with soot. His beard smelled of turnips and smoke, and his bones creaked louder than the bed beneath them. He wore no boots, only socks knotted at the ankle, mended so many times they'd become more thread than cloth. His fingers twitched with memory, perhaps of fire, perhaps of music, perhaps of fields now drowned in frost and debt. Between them, pressed awkwardly with arms folded and eyes twitching beneath closed lids, lay a stranger. His skin was sallow, his breath sour. Mud clung to the hem of his tunic. He had said no name, given no story. They had asked none. That was the rule here. Strangers came, strangers stayed. Strangers left, if the weather allowed. Their shared bed was nothing noble, just a wooden platform laid uneven on stones, splintered and warped, slumped on one side, where the boy's older brother had died last winter. No one had the strength to rebuild it. It groaned under the weight of the living, and beneath it, curled like punctuation, slept the pig. It shifted in its sleep, grunted, and returned to stillness. Its snout poked out from beneath the frame, twitching once, twice. The girl sometimes whispered to it. She believed it understood more than the priest, that it carried warmth like grace. And though it stank and squealed and occasionally kicked, it had never once left her cold. The house was a single room, and it held too many stories to speak aloud. Smoke curled from the hearth in weak ribbons, dragging the stink of old meat and mildew into the rafters. Mice scratched along the beam above, chewing into a dried onion no one had remembered to take down. A rusted pan sat beside the hearth, collecting drips from the sodden roof, each drop echoing faintly like an hourglass counting backward. A crucifix hung above the bed, crooked and dim. It had once been carved by a travelling friar in exchange for soup. Its edges were worn, its corners stained. A blue ribbon faded from prayers and weeping was tied around it like a memory half kept. No one prayed to it aloud anymore, but none dared take it down. The woman of the house did not sleep. She stirred the porridge with a bone-handled spoon, her back to the sleepers. Her breath steamed faintly as she leaned over the low fire, trying to coax heat from dying coals. The spoon scraped gently against the side of the pot, making a sound that, in another life, might have been soothing. But here it was only a measure of emptiness. She did not glance back, did not count who slept, who stirred, who dreamed. She had stopped thinking in terms of individuals. They were not people anymore, not truly. They were limbs, shapes, weights. They were warmth or cold. One of the children moaned in their sleep, dreaming of falling, perhaps, or drowning. She did not move. She had learned that comfort was dangerous. It invited need, and need was a luxury they could not afford. She looked instead to the window, a hole in the wall covered by scraped lambskin. Moonlight filtered through it weakly, revealing the silhouette of frost creeping up the edges like a hand. Tomorrow it would be thicker. Tomorrow she would have to scrape it off with the iron knife and hope the blade still held an edge. The old man coughed again, a low and hollow sound. The child flinched in his sleep, nestling closer to the stranger. The stranger's body tensed, then relaxed. In that moment they became a single shape, 3 lives pressed together in reluctant communion outside. The world was held in frost. Trees groaned under the weight of ice. The stream, not far from the door, had frozen over days ago. Only a trickle moved beneath the surface now, thin and hidden, like blood in the wrist of a dying man. The barn door flapped open and shut, the latch long lost. It would bang all night. Inside, time did not pass. It lingered, thick and unmoving. The pig shifted again and let out a soft wheeze. The girl, half awake, murmured something into her blanket. A name, perhaps, or a question. The stranger beside her reached under his cloak and drew his knees to his chest. No, one had spoken for hours. Speech in such a space was like spilling wine on dry cloth, it soaked in too fast left stains. So they saved their words for daylight, for barter, for defense. And yet, in the soft churn of silence, a thought pulsed inside the woman, stirring the pot. What if this was all that remained? Not just the room, but the world. These bodies, this straw, this night that never ended. What if there were no spring? She closed her eyes for a breath and remembered laughter, her own, once, in a field, barefoot. And young, a boy had thrown an apple at her and missed. The apple had landed in the mud. She remembered that detail most, the way the fruit looked ruined, and how she had picked it up anyway, wiped it on her skirt, and eaten it without flinching. Now, she stirred porridge that would stretch too thin. She would lie and say she'd already eaten. She would serve the old man first, then the children, then maybe the stranger. She didn't know what he carried under that cloak, but she knew the hunger in his eyes. The fire snapped once, one last bursting, then went still. The embers sighed, and the room dimmed again. Her eyes adjusted. They always did. Behind her, the child reached out in his sleep and found the old man's hand. It was dry, cracked, stiff, but it closed, gently, without waking. A tether, a warmth, a mercy. The woman smiled once, faintly, like the memory of a prayer. Tomorrow she might bury someone. Tomorrow the stranger might leave or not. Tomorrow they might slaughter the pig, or the pig might save them another night. She didn't know. She stirred the pot once more, then set the spoon aside and turned toward the heap of bodies in the bed. Sigh. A silence, a waiting, and then, as the wind slipped beneath the door, bringing with it the faint scent of snow and death, she whispered aloud for the first time that night, "Hold each other." No one replied, but the bodies shifted. Instinctively, closer, the pig exhaled. The fire died, and sleep returned. The rain had turned to sleet, and the sleet to something harder, something that stung the skin and cracked the lips without sound. Each gust struck the side of the house like a hand, relentless and bitter. The wind had claws tonight. It dragged its body across the sod roof, searching for a way in, a weakness, a soul too close to the threshold. Inside the walls sweated cold. Damp soaked into the packed earth floor, rising in shallow mist near the hearth. The fire had long since collapsed into coals, glowing dully in their bed of ash. A single ember flared, then died. No one moved to stir it. A boy, no older than 6, lay beneath a threadbare wool blanket. His breath was shallow, his eyelids fluttered. A low whimper slipped from his lips, Scott, somewhere between dream and illness. His fever had broken, but the air around him was still thick with death. He hadn't spoken in a day. Beside him, his sister curled tightly around herself, fists balled beneath her chin, pressed so closely to the body of the sow that her ribs rose in time with the pig's belly. The sow was old and wide, and the girl trusted her more than the men in the bed. The beast radiated warmth from her guts, a furnace of flesh. Her bristles scratched, her scent burned, but the child had long since learned to ignore such things. Heat was a treasure. The rest was ritual. The bed was not a bed. It was a suggestion. Planks, really warped from years of piss and sweat and childbirth propped on stones, covered in sacks and cloaks that had once belonged to those who no longer had need of them. One cloak still smelled faintly of priest's oil. Another bore the stain of afterbirth. Each had a story. None was spoken. In the far corner, wrapped in her dead husband's coat, the mother lay flat, watching the door. It was not locked. There was nothing to lock it with. Just a strip of wool nailed across the top, fluttering in the draught like a torn banner. She had nailed it herself. Her knuckles still bore the bruises. Her hammer was a rock that a visitor lay. Beside her, he had arrived after sundown, soaked and silent, face drawn tight with frost. His fingers were blue at the tips, wrapped in rags. He hadn't begged, he hadn't smiled. She had looked at him once, seen that he meant no harm, more that if he did, he hadn't the strength to act on it and pointed to the bed. Now he lay with his back to them all, shivering still beneath his cloak. He hadn't spoken, he wouldn't, and in truth, she preferred it that way. The air in the room was thick with boiled leek and the sharp stink of wet wool. A pot still hung over the dying coals. It had been full, once now scraped clean, the rim glistening faintly with fat no one dared lick. The ladle, carved from yew, lay across the rim like a warning. Rushes beneath the bed were dry in patches, soaked in others. Somewhere beneath them, a dead mouse stiffened. The daughter would find it in the morning, poke it with a stick, and whisper a burial prayer she made up on the spot. She believed all things had souls, even lice, even pigs, even the shadows that shifted across the ceiling at night. The woman's eyes lingered on the ceiling now. Cracks formed shapes. Once she'd seen a cross. Another time, a hand. Tonight, there was nothing, just the weave of beams, an old straw blackened with soot and time. Her stomach ached with hunger, but her body had grown skilled at ignoring it. Hunger was part of the rhythm now. Hunger and silence. Her eyes dropped to the boy again. His cheeks were flushed, not with fever, but with dreaming. She hoped he was seeing fields, or bread, or the river in spring when it was wild and green and full of eels. Outside, the sleet struck harder, clawing at the door. The visitor stirred. His shoulders lifted, then fell. He pulled his cloak tighter. His feet were bare now. She saw the blackness at the toes. If the cold didn't take them, the rot would. Still, he hadn't spoken. And still, she let him stay. She'd once been told that charity cleans the soul like fire cleans the blade. But she no longer believed in souls, or fire, only blades, and how quiet they could be. Her hand moved, almost without thought, to the rosary hidden beneath her smock. She didn't pull it out. She only touched it. The beads were warm from her skin, worn smooth by grief. She whispered something, not a prayer, just a name. Then, from the opposite end of the bed, the little girl stirred. "Is the pig cold?" She mumbled, voice thick with sleep. The mother shook her head, though the child could not see her. "No," she whispered, "she's dreaming." "About what?" The mother paused. "About not being eaten," she said. The girl laughed, soft and brittle. Then silence. The wind howled again. It found a new gap in the thatch and whispered through it, weaving around the cradle in the corner, empty since the summer when the baby came too early. The cloth still draped across it fluttered, faintly. No one had dared remove it, as if to do so would invite something back in, or send something away. The visitor coughed, a sharp sound. He did not lift his head. The mother rose slowly. Each joint ached, her knees cracked. She moved like someone older than her years, because she was. Time moved faster in the hunger. She crossed the room, picked up a wool shawl that had once belonged to her aunt, and placed it over the stranger. Her fingers brushed his shoulder. It was damp. His breath trembled. He did not speak, neither did she. She returned to the fire, knelt, and pressed a twig into the ashes, hoping for a spark. There was none. Still, she stayed there, kneeling hands, resting on her thighs. Behind her, the children shifted in their sleep. The pig snorted and settled again. The cradle swayed just once as the wind caught it, and the mother whispered again. This time, a prayer, not for mercy, but for morning. It would come, cold, grey, and without warmth. But it would come, and in that knowledge, she stayed, still, silent, watching the coals. It was the third night without fire. The hearth, once sacred, now sat black and cold its stones, veined with soot and silence, where flame had danced only. The memory of warmth remained, clinging to the walls like breath on frozen glass. The smoke hole above had iced over. Even the wind had stopped visiting. In the bed, 6 bodies huddled, each one a knot of need. They did not touch by choice. They touched because the cold left no gaps, because death slipped in through spaces not filled by flesh. The mother lay in the center, her back curved like a bowstring, her legs drawn up to protect the infant pressed against her ribs. She felt no kick from the child, no stir, only weight, heavy and uncertain. Beside her, the girl whimpered, not from a dream, but from the sudden snap of her own teeth against her tongue. She had been chewing in sleep, again imagining bread, likely, or milk. Her lips were cracked. The blood froze before it reached her chin. The boy coughed behind her. Each hack sounded deeper, darker. He was sinking, Not quickly, but steadily, like something swallowed by wet earth. The pig stirred at the foot of the bed, its hide twitching. With fleas. It had grown silent these past days, hoarding its heat, sensing the weight of gazes that lingered too long. Its snout was crusted with frost. Its breath came slow and even. It was the one heartbeat they all trusted. Not the mother's, not the children's, the pig's. And the stranger, the one who had come 3 nights ago, hadn't moved in hours. His breath, when visible, rose faintly in the dark, curling upward like smoke from a dying candle. His boots were gone now, taken to patch the gap in the door where the wind whistled like a ghost. He hadn't protested, had only nodded once and returned to silence. The mother opened her eyes. They burned with fatigue. She had not slept, not truly, for weeks. Rest came in slivers, in fragments, in the spaces between crying and waking, between hunger and memory. Her hands trembled beneath the wool. Her gaze drifted to the wall above the bed, where she had etched 3 crosses with a knife, one for each child who'd made it past their 2nd year. The knife was gone now, traded to a peddler for salt and barley. She hadn't cried when it left her hands, but something inside her had grieved. That knife had carved names, cut bread, protected the door, taken splinters from her father's palm. Now the only blade in the house was the one in her mind, a sharp knowing that not all of them would make it through winter. The cradle stood untouched in the corner, covered with a linen sheet, yellowed, and stiff with old milk. The child in her arms would never see it. She knew this. The baby had stopped suckling. Its breath was shallow, its limbs still, but she kept it close, kept it warm, kept it from being alone in the dark. Her mouth moved with words she no longer believed, psalms learned when she was young, prayers muttered by her mother through broken teeth. They clung to her lips now like smoke. She didn't care if they reached heaven. She only hoped they didn't leave her. The pig exhaled again, a long, low breath. Its ears flicked once. The girl rolled closer, seeking heat, her hands finding the folds of her mother's skirt. The mother did not move. She could not. Every motion cost something. The stranger shifted, too. Not much, just a rustle, then quiet. He had not spoken since the night he arrived. But each morning, when the girl woke, she found a twig of kindling beside the hearth. Dry, clean. Not from the woods nearby. These twigs smelled of pine, of another place. He brought them while they slept, left them without sound. She wondered what he had burned before, who, a gust of wind returned, thin and bitter. It rattled the patched door and curled beneath the bed. The girl gasped and pulled her feet higher, tucking them under the sow's flank. The sow grunted but did not rise. Its eye opened once, dark and distant, then closed again. The boy coughed once more, blood threading. From the corner of his mouth, the mother wiped it with the corner of her sleeve and said nothing. Outside, the world cracked. Trees split beneath the weight of frost. The stream behind the house had vanished beneath a lid of ice. Even the birds had gone. Only the crows remained, silent in the trees, watching. Inside, time drifted sideways. Minutes and hours held no meaning. Here, only breath counted, only warmth, only the absence of motion. The mother reached for the candle stub near the hearth. Her fingers closed around it. It was soft with age, nearly melted to nothing. She brought it close to her chest and held it there, unlit. She thought of lighting it. Just once, just to see their faces, again not as shadows, but as the children they were. But she hesitated. Light was dangerous. It showed what was dying. Instead, she clutched the wax and whispered a name into it. The name of the child in her arms, one she had never spoken aloud. Not since birth. It was a name she had borrowed from a vision, a saint in a dream, a word older than hope. The child did not stir. The stranger turned in his sleep and exhaled. The pig's tail twitched, and then without warning the cradle creaked, not from wind, but from weight. The girl sat up sharply, eyes wide, heart pounding. She looked toward the corner. The linen cover had fallen halfway, revealing nothing beneath it but straw and an old doll missing both eyes. She turned to her mother, but the woman had already seen. Her lips moved again, forming another name, one not meant for this world. The cradle stilled. The girl lay back down. The mother held the baby tighter, and the room fell quiet. Somewhere beyond the trees, a wolf howled long and low, not for hunger, but for memory, as if mourning the warmth of fire it had never known. The mother did not move. She whispered only once more, "Spring is coming." She didn't believe it, not really. But in the bed, the pig stirred and pressed its bulk against her daughter's leg, and the girl smiled in her sleep. Outside, the wind paused. Inside, nothing moved, but beneath the cradle, something breathed. Log cracked in the distance, but the sound did not come from the hearth. There was no fire here, only the illusion of one flickering in the corner of memory. Ashes gathered in the pit like grey snow, soft and lifeless. A blackened pot hung empty above it, swinging slightly from a draught that had no beginning and no end. The room did not breathe, it waited. Inside, they lay like fallen statues, tangled in a heap of limbs, wool, and silence. The air was too cold for speech, too thick with the smell of old tallow, rot, and damp earth to invite anything human. Even the lice seemed slower tonight, clinging to collars and eyelids with less urgency, as if they too had lost faith in spring. A boy shifted in his sleep, not from a dream, but from the cold bite of his own wet blanket. His nose dripped. He wiped it on the hem of his sleeve without waking. In another time, his mother would have scolded him gently. That time no longer existed. She now watched him sleep with the vacant gaze of someone who had spent too many nights bargaining with nothing. She clutched the youngest child to her chest, not because she thought she could save him, but because it was the only thing left to do. His skin was grey in the firelight that wasn't there, his breath shallow. Every rise of his ribs was a question. Across from her, the stranger rested with one hand on the hilt of a blade no one had seen him use. His face was turned toward the wall, away from the room, as though to shield himself from being remembered. His feet were bare, his toes wrapped in cloth and leaking pus. He had not spoken in 2 nights. At the foot of the bed, the pig grunted. In its sleep, its sides heaving with the slow rhythm of an old bellows. Its eyes remained closed, but its ears flicked now and then, as if listening to something none of the others could hear. A single drop of water fell from the ceiling. It landed in the pewter cup beside the hearth, plink. The girl opened her eyes. She was the only one awake now. She didn't move, just blinked once, slowly, and stared at the roof, watching her own breath drift upward and vanish. She didn't remember being warm, not really. She had a memory of a red cloak. Once her uncle had brought it from market after 3 days of silence. It had smelled of rosemary and old apples. She wore it for 2 winters, and then it vanished. Her mother never spoke of it again. Neither did her uncle. His grave was somewhere in the back field, marked only by a crooked jawbone hung from a nail. She had put the bone there herself. It wasn't his, but it looked like it could have been. She closed her eyes again. When she opened them, the cradle was moving, not rocking, just a slow shift. Like something inside had changed weight. The girl did not cry out. She simply turned her head and looked toward her mother. The woman hadn't seen. She was still murmuring prayers. Her lips pressed to the baby's scalp, rocking side to side so faintly it seemed the room itself might be swaying with her. The pig stirred again. Then the stranger, his fingers twitched. His blade tapped the wood once. A soft knock that woke the boy beside him. The boy blinked, wiped his mouth, and sat up. No one spoke. The girl slowly slipped from beneath the shared blanket and crawled across the rushes. They scratched her knees, but she welcomed the pain. It reminded her she was still part of the world. She reached the cradle and lifted the cloth. It was empty, had been for months, but the indent in the straw was fresh. She reached out a hand and placed it in the hollow. Still warm, a voice whispered, from the corner, not loud, not cruel, just ... there. Do you remember me? She turned. No one was there. Only the spoon tucked beneath the threshold. Still there, still cold. Still guarding, the girl returned to the bed, curled again beside the pig, and said nothing. The boy was crying now, quietly, into his hands. For a dream he couldn't remember. For a father he never saw. The stranger sat up, watching him. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a single strip of meat, salted, dried. He held it out. The boy hesitated, then took it. The mother did not protest. Food was not shared. It simply moved, like smoke, like memory. The candle flickered once, not from flame, but from the breath of something unseen. The mother looked toward it and whispered a name, not one from this house. One she had once buried. Then silence again. The cradle did not move, but the girl kept her hand on it, like holding down a dream. The pig farted, soft and warm, and the boy laughed through tears. The stranger smiled, just slightly. Then pulled the blanket tighter. The wind had stopped. The room was still, not warm, not safe, but still, and in that stillness, the girl closed her eyes again. She dreamed of a table, not a feast, just bread and a chair, and her own name, spoken aloud like a gift.